So my presentation is all about the one that was just shown and how I'm going to try to explain it to the end user and how it's all going to get done. But really what it's about is how a developer or an agency can help the end user better understand how a project's going to happen in Magento and how the customer or the client can understand all the things that are going to happen within the project. So again, I'm Brent Peterson. I'm a Magento evangelist, agency coach, and I consider myself an expert at taking selfies while in motion. So if anybody follows me on Twitter, they'd see those. I work for Magento, which is just like Magento, but the first letter is turned upside down. And we're going to talk about projects. And how projects have to work. So really projects are a relationship that we have with our client. As a developer or as an agency, we want to make sure that everybody's in tune with what's going to happen and what's coming up. The more we invest up front in any of these project relationships, the better success we're going to have for any project. So we're talking about software projects. And if anybody knows about software projects, they're complicated, they're hazardous. The longer you let them go, the more potential there is for failure. And I found this on CNET, or ZNet. 68% of the projects that they polled failed. So that means there's more than half that we get into that are having a problem, and they don't consider them a successful project at the end. So how do we accomplish this task of getting over this? First of all, we want to try to make it simple. We want to try to help the client to understand what we're going to get into. We're going to go over some assumptions in the beginning. Everybody has different assumptions on what's happening in the project. We want to help the client understand what we're doing, so that we do that through education. We spend some time with the client learning about them, helping them learn about us. We want to do discovery on projects, of course. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the project life cycle, like what happens during the project. So what to expect when you don't know what to expect. A lot of clients, this is the first time. They have no idea what they're getting themselves into, and they have no idea a lot of times they don't know what you're talking about, and they may not even care what you're talking about. So we assume nothing. We know that Magento projects in general are complex, they're complicated, they have a lot of moving parts. We saw from the previous presentation that there's a lot of things that can work well in Magento as long as everything works in tandem and it scales. Everyone is different. There's never one that's the same. So it's not like a SaaS platform where you can just have a packaged thing that's always running. There's something different about every project. There's a different machine, a different server. Everybody has a different code base. And every client has a different experience. Some clients may have done one project, some clients may have done 10 projects. Every integrator is different. So different integrators have different styles. They're going to have different work procedures. They're going to have different delivery pipelines. So how do we do it? We learn early, we learn often. We start these conversations up front with the client to try to determine the best path to go forward and to try to get us all in line with what we're going to be doing. So we're going to learn from what the client has done in the past. We want to find out about their project experience. We want to find out about their technical knowledge. We don't want to start babbling on about something that they really don't care about. We want to make a clear statement of work. The statement of work is going to be the most important part. As long as everything is there and in writing, and we can have something to reference later, just like a code base that we can have something to reference, we understand what's happening, the client can understand what's happening. Because the biggest problem is, as George Bernard Shaw said, the illusion of something that's actually taking place. The client thinks they've heard one thing, we think we've heard one thing. That is the biggest part of a project that can fall down if somebody assumes something that we don't know. So how do we do that? We have to make it clear. We want to start with a conversation about what's to be expected in a project. We want to start that conversation early. So those expectations that we have, and setting those expectations early and upfront, are going to help the success of your project as you go through it. Obviously, we want to make it simple enough for everybody to understand. As we saw again from the previous presentation, there's a lot of things that the client may not understand. So if we can put it in simple terms and they can understand the process and why we're doing this process, it's easier for them to understand why we can't just have the developer go directly on the server and modify the code and then have everything keep running. So explain to them why we have to do that in a simple term so everybody understands what's happening. Obviously, we need to demonstrate commitment. So saying we're going to do something and staying in a cycle of committing to delivering the product that you're setting out to do is going to give the client a better understanding and expectation that we're going to be doing something that we're going to do, and that, of course, goes right into building confidence. So how do we do this? We're going to educate. Education is all about expectations. So we start with who, what, and why. We start with who we are as an agency, or as a developer, you want to start with that. You want to tell the client what you've done, who you are, why we do it. We do it because we love Magento. We do it because we're good at Magento. There's all kinds of reasons of why we do it, but explaining to the client why you're doing it is an important part, that you're committed to what you're putting yourself into. It's more than just throwing out some code, but why we want to deliver your Magento project is an important thing for aligning expectations with your customer. Then participation. Obviously, a developer has to be participating in the project. But if a client doesn't participate in the project, and the client expects that they're going to hand us, or we're going to go over a document and then we're going to deliver a website without any participation, you're really setting your project up for disaster. Expectations, again, are just the biggest part on keeping those. And then what I like to say is having awkward conversations with the client upfront and often. So there's things as a developer or as an agency that you may not want to talk to the client about, but those things are the important things that need to be talked about upfront. So things that are going to impact a project timeline later on are going to be the topics that you want to cover first, so you don't run into expectations later that they expected something completely different. So the upfront education is key by both the client and the agency. So it is a two-way street. It's a relationship that you're building with the client, that you want them to participate in it. You want the client to fully participate in the project. And that only the good of the project is going to come through by the expectations, and that both the developer and the agency, or the developer and the client, are going to have to participate and manage those expectations. But at the end of the day, it's up to us as an agency or as a developer to be responsible for those expectations. So the best way to document those is to write a statement of work. And that statement of work is going to cover everything in that project. And what we like to do is have the statement of work only what we're going to be doing. Because a client may have heard something. They may have heard something that somebody has talked about on the phone, and they may have expected that thing is going to be part of your project. So as you're going through that, explaining to them that if it's not in the statement of work, and adding something to the project is going to change the project timeline, and adding something may cost something more. All these things we want to talk about up front so they understand what's going on. Part of the problem is that if a client delivers something later, that we want to let them understand as well that if they deliver designs, something can't be done the next day. And even if we go through the whole process of doing an in-depth discovery, that there will be surprises. There's always going to be something that we don't know, and there's going to be something that the client doesn't know. So if you start a project where you're migrating a store from another platform, that project may include something or a feature that's built into that platform that just worked, that nobody realized why or how it happened, and it may come up when the feature doesn't work in the new project. So really, we're performing discovery on us and the client. We want to learn about the client. We want to learn about everything that the client's done. We want to learn everything about the client's project. So it's a complete, fully incorporated program. So we'll talk about discovery for a little bit. What to expect when you don't know what to expect. Discovery, I think, is the most important part, and a lot of people run right into a project or some work by just throwing out a quote. And that at the end of the day, that quote turns into be your statement of work. But you really don't know what you're getting yourself into. So if you do a fixed bid quote by giving a statement of work, really you've set yourself up for something you don't even know. So the first case is you've done a statement of work, you've gone over a phone call, you've never seen the code, and that's your discovery. The best case, or the worst case, I should say, is after the job's done, you realize that you should have done discovery. Because you learned a lot from doing all that extra work and not getting paid, or you've somehow presented a bill to the client for all the extra work and they didn't realize that we didn't know what we're doing. The best case is that during the statement of work is built from a discovery document, and educating the client that this is a really important part of the project cycle, that we build a statement or build a discovery document that documents what's going to go into the actual project. It gives us a complete understanding of everything, and it allows us to review the code that exists. Because in Magento, there's a lot of things that do exist that we don't need to talk about, but there are things that impact the project that are outside of it. So part of it that exists are obviously your product catalog, the customers, all those things that we know and we're expecting in the project, but the client doesn't know if this is their first Magento project. And then there's a lot of add-ons. So we don't know, we have to help in our discovery and our education to teach the client the differences. And when the client starts to ask for many other things, we have to communicate to them on how all those extra things will impact the project. So if they want to add 40 different modules and they want to add a bunch of heavy images, that those things are going to impact how their end site will work and how the speed of the site will work in the whole aspect of the project. So now we get into the project lifecycle. We like to have a process of the lifecycle, so we have a circular project lifecycle. In that, we want to talk to the client about how our project lifecycle works. We carefully explain it. We want to talk about, if this is their first time, we explain each of the parts of the process and how we get from making the code to delivering the code and everything that happens in between. We want to talk about our timelines. If we don't give them enough information, or we give them bad information, we're going to lose trust. If there is a delay in what's happening, it's best to talk about that delay up front. And if it's a delay on our end, we want to own up to it. If we're honest and upfront with the client, they're going to have respect for what we're doing. And then we want to balance information, because giving them too much information is going to result in some confusion. They may not understand the entire process, and that process is going to make your relationship more difficult. So in our project lifecycle, like I said, we have a circular project lifecycle. We like to say the client asks for some work. We approve the work, or we come up with the statement of work for that. We start doing the work. The client then approves it through a UAT process. They hopefully pay for the work, and then we start all over again. So some of those things will happen in this project lifecycle are going to be changes. So what do we do if something changes in this? We have to make a clear statement or a clear change order. We want to document what's changed and talk about how that change wasn't part of the SOW or wasn't part about what we talked about up front. We want to talk about how those changes impact the project timeline. So either we want to increase the timeline, or we need to take something out of the project to allow for the same timeline to get to the end. Then we want to talk about what does the budget look like. If the client wants to add something, then we're going to have to add resources and time to the project. And then we want to talk about whether that item that they're adding can go in after the project launches. So it doesn't have to be part of the initial launch of the project, that we can add this into the post phase of the project. So a lot of these things obviously can be accomplished through reporting, and I think that reporting is the most important part of this. If we can do, during our production cycle, that we do a weekly report and give the client the important data they want, that's going to allow everybody to understand what's happening at the time it's happening with the most of a week delay. So helping the client to see how many hours have been done, how many hours are expected to do, how those hours impact how long the project's going to take, will help them understand how long and what's going to happen, all those questions that they may be having. If you waited to the very end and now you're 3 weeks or 4 weeks late and they want to know why, this could have been solved by at the time that the incident or whatever it is that's changed happened. We do daily status updates through tickets, so the client has exposure to see what's happening in that project, and we work back and forth with the client through a ticketing system so they can understand specific items that are changing. Now this is, some clients don't need this much detail, but it allows the client to see as much detail as they need to see to help them feel comfortable in their project. If there is schedule delays, we want to report that. We want to put it in writing. We want to make sure that they understand what the delay is, because oftentimes the delay isn't always on the agency side. Oftentimes the client may deliver data late. So really, you can't expect to have a web store up and running until you have the stuff to sell. And if you're expecting your site to be ready on May 1st and you're delivering data on May 5th, it's really hard to meet your timeline. So explaining those scheduling delays and explaining in your reporting that you have roadblocks, and some of those roadblocks are on the client, and listing the roadblocks by client side and agency side and helping understand what's happened. That also gives you a clear audit trail. Looking back, why did this project take an extra 4 weeks? Well, we can go back and look that the fourth sprint of the project was supposed to start on this date, but we couldn't start for 2 weeks because we didn't have data. And then anything the client needs to know. So we put notes in our reporting. It tells everybody what they need to know at any time. We want to respect everybody's time. We know that the time is valuable. We know that the client is busy. We want to give them good data all the time. We want to make sure that that time is spent well when we're on phone calls, that they understand what we're delivering. We want to deliver valuable content, so it's key data that the client asks for, and we can give as much or as little as they need. And then we want to time box all those meetings that we have with the client, so help them to understand that this meeting is going to take 30 minutes or less, and that we're going to respect the time that we're taking with them. So I have some pitfalls to go through, but if we wanted to go to Q&A, I think I have about 5 minutes left. I can go through some pitfalls, or we can do some Q&A. Is that right, Ben? Do we have 5 minutes?
Yes.
Okay. I'll just go through some pitfalls from a technical side. So I'm a little bit technical and a little bit sales. So I do a lot of stuff that makes everybody really nervous in our company. So I know enough to get myself into trouble, and I can sell enough to get the developers into trouble. So I think that one of the worst things that you can do as an agency is that you let the developer talk directly to the client, because what's going to happen is that they're going to take a bunch of requirements, and then they're going to say, yes, of course we can do that. Because why wouldn't you want to build some really cool extension, even though the extension is going to take 120 hours and it's available, for free on GitHub? These are pitfalls that moving the developer out of the project cycle, out of the project management cycle, are going to give a headache to everybody in the project, mostly the project manager. Obviously, if a developer takes a project that they know nothing about Magento, we're really setting ourselves up for disaster. Or if it's a digital agency that takes on a Magento project and they have a PHP developer and they think they're going to deliver the project in easy fashion, there's going to be some problems there. If there's decision makers that don't know anything about the technical side of Magento, so they make a decision about a project but don't know why they're making that decision, that's going to give us a problem. And then why something is a great idea but bad in practice. So if you have one micro instance of Amazon Web Server running and you're going to run 200 store views, there's going to be a problem. It's a great idea to have 200 store views, but you really need to have all those resources. So I think I'll stop there, and if anybody has any particular questions, I can answer them. Yes?
Do you use Scrum with clients?
We do Agile. Yeah.
Ask that question again. Give me the mic. Oh, I should know you, Matthew. Yeah. Sorry, I think my voice.
Do you use Agile or Scrum with your clients?
Yes, we do. So I will say the hardest part about Agile is that a client always wants to know how much the project's going to cost, and that trying to explain then in an Agile process that really it's just it's a bid or a estimation.
A slightly loaded question. I work in a similar capacity to yourself. At what point do you think it's the obligation of a client to be a good client, as opposed to us having to have the obligation just to manage their expectations?
So I'm always a proponent of our best clients are the ones that we are engaged with almost on a daily basis. Because if you're talking to the client every day, they're going to understand where you're at, and we're going to understand where they're at. So the best clients that we have are the ones that we talk to all the time. The worst clients, if we want to say worst, which I think is a really bad word, is the ones that say in 6 months, they haven't done a single thing, and then they say, I need something tomorrow. Obviously, there could be other cases. Other times, clients trying to shove something into the production cycle, and everything's an emergency. At some point, everything can't be an emergency.
Do you guys incorporate the actual estimation into the actual project? Like, do you bill for that? The estimate in like that discovery that you guys do?
Yes. So our model will be or is that we want to build that discovery process as part of it, and either it's part of the full estimation of the project, or it's a section of it that anybody can opt out. So say you build in 32 hours for discovery, and if the client sees your discovery, now you've just given them a roadmap to build the site, they can either choose to go on with your estimation or they can opt out.
Any more questions? Anyone? Anyone? All right, big warm round of applause for Brent Peterson.